Welcome in to another episode here of Home Field Advantage. I hope you're all having a great week or weekend wherever you're listening to us or watching along across our great country or our great land. My name is Will Highland. It's October 23rd, 2022. We are almost through the end of October, what I like to call the greatest month in the sports calendar. We've got the NFL in full swing. We've got the Major League Baseball playoffs beginning, which have been exciting. We have college football in the midst of its season and starting to get really interesting with some of these rankings conversations. You have the NHL dropping the puck on a season, as well as the NBA tipping off on their new campaign. And lastly, you have all sorts of speculation leading up to this World Cup that we're going to have. And then in the international soccer world, you've got a ton going on. And then here domestically with the MLS, it is a packed sports month, one of my favorites. And truly a remarkable time of year if you're just a lover of and follower of sports. And then, as always, there's never a shortage of off the field things to talk about. But for this show, I do want to focus. And again, we appreciate you all coming in to hang out with us. If you're hanging out with us on YouTube, I want to invite you to drop down and like this video and hit that subscribe button. It does a lot to help our channel grow. Then if you're listening to us on audio, go ahead and give us a subscribe, follow, whatever it's called. We appreciate you doing that as well. But where I want to focus today's pod, and it will be a short one, is on two topics. The first being the inconsistent play among veteran quarterbacks in the NFL. That will be the first topic. And then the second being, should the Yankees be eliminated by Houston and it doesn't look great for New York right now, what will that team do going forward to bolster their chances of finally getting over that hump? But where I want to first start is the continuous lack of dominance from quarterbacks around the league in the NFL that we have seen for so long stop. So let me just say that again. We have seen so many quarterbacks, the dominance for all those years, Brady, Rodgers, Wilson, seen it for decades. It appears to have evaporated. I'm not quite sure how, and I'm not going to write it off completely. But today the Buccaneers lost 21-3 to the Carolina Panthers, the same Panthers team that just traded their star player 3 days ago. The Green Bay Packers led by Aaron Rodgers, lost to a Washington Commanders team that, quite frankly, in my opinion, becomes more and more irrelevant by the day and is a step closer to more mediocrity for the next franchise. This Washington Commanders franchise will be probably the most mediocre franchise in the history of the NFL going forward. So much so that Taylor Heineke, remember him from 2 years ago in the playoffs? He's been getting snaps. So just to reiterate, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers lost to a Carolina Panther team that has been mediocre at best for most of my lifetime, and a team that just traded 3 days ago their best player. Meanwhile, the Packers lose to a Washington Commanders team that, again, very irrelevant, very mediocre. You could barely call that an NFL operation at the moment. That's Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers losing Week 7 regular season games to cream puff opponents. And in Brady's case, he lost last week as a favorite on the road against a Steeler team that is led by Kenny Little Hands Pickett and Mitch Trubisky. Now, we know Mike Tomlin's a good coach. But and we know Ron Rivera is a decent coach. But Matt Rule also was simply fired a few weeks ago too. So that Carolina Panther team that Brady lost to, they just fired their coach and they just traded their best player. It's a joke of an operation, and yet both of those teams were able to knock off Brady and Rodgers in the same week. Then you have Russell Wilson, who, for most of my life, has been a likable, I shouldn't say most of my life, most of my adult NFL fanhood, right? He's been a likable figure. He's been a guy that you look at Russell Wilson and you're like, that guy, he's got some fight in him. He's got some underdog spirit in him, being undersized, having to transfer from NC State to Wisconsin in college, being taken later than most quarterbacks at that time, always having to deal with a stereotype of being a smaller, mobile, undersized quarterback. Won a Super Bowl in his second year. He's an African-American quarterback. Some of the stereotypes that go along with that. He's just been a likable guy, Russell Wilson. Early on, he did an interview prior to the Super Bowl win when Seattle played Denver. And, he's talking about his father passing away and all this great stuff about this underdog story. I love Russell Wilson. Want to run through the wall for the guy. Fast forward a few years, I don't even recognize that player. It could be that he went to Denver, got his bag of money, maybe has sort of been out of the playoffs for a few years. I mean, the Seahawks, even in his later days there, were never really contenders. They haven't really been the same team for 5 years now. Then he goes to Denver and everyone's got these big expectations and he's fallen flat. They've lost some really ugly games. They lost some really ugly Thursday night games, some Monday night games. They've been in prime time a lot, so the country has had an opportunity to see just how bad of an offensive operation that is. I look at Brady and Rodgers, and I still think they have some tools. And I look at Wilson the same way. They still got talent. It just seems like these three guys, all right, that for most of my adult fanhood have been stalwarts in the NFL, have just fallen to become unrelatable, unlikable a-holes. And look, I love Tom Brady. I grew up, I idolized the guy. I had jerseys of the guy. I had posters of the guy. I played Madden for decades with with Brady as my Madden quarterback, right? I'm a Pats fan. I bleed New England Patriots. But, now that I'm not blinded by the New England loyalty, I look at Tom Brady and he's always going to be the greatest quarterback of all time. Don't let anybody take that away from him. Because the minute you say that he's not, you lose every football argument, in my opinion. But a guy that was drafted 199th overall, a guy that had to tooth and nail and fight and claw his way through, or fight tooth and nail and claw his way through the early part of his career in college and to get his shot in the NFL and win all those Super Bowls and then go 10 years without one and then win again and deal with scandals and all this and all that. You'd think that there would be a little bit of ounce of just relatability factor left in him. And I just look at Tom Brady and it's just, I don't really know if I can relate to the guy. And then we all know about Aaron Rodgers, right? I don't care what his vaccine politics are. I really don't give a rat's ass about that. But I'm confused about how somebody is just so out of step with reality, with how fans feel and care about the sport. It just seems like all three of these guys, and Wilson with his cringy Subway commercial that just got pulled, and the rumors about teammates having to contact his manager to get his number and stuff. It just seems like all three of these guys have just sort of lost their way with fans. And they're not performing well on the field. They're not relatable as individuals. And it's hard for me as a fan of football who has watched these guys to think, well, maybe it's just their time to go and leave the sport. Maybe Brady would have been better off if he just retired even after last year's loss to the Rams, walks off into the sunset and just enjoys life as a broadcaster. He's going to be a hell of an entertainer. Now it seems like the public image is all against him because of what went on with Giselle and whatnot in terms of their divorce. And then with Rodgers, maybe he was better off going into TV and not coming back to Green Bay or starting his own podcast with Pat McAfee or whoever the hell he wants to talk to. And maybe Russell Wilson, I know wasn't necessarily his decision to get traded, but maybe the change of scenery to Denver wasn't what he needed in his career. Maybe not to Denver specifically. Perhaps he needed to go somewhere with less pressure to win than an NFL city like Denver. Maybe he could have gone to somewhere like I don't know, maybe a Houston or a team that was just crumbling, right? That didn't have huge expectations that he could like bring people up, because he has that motivating part of him. I know he does. But it just seems like that's gone, and the locker room doesn't like him in Denver, and it doesn't seem like the locker room in Tampa Bay is quite thrilled with Tom at the moment. So I guess my bottom line is with these three, everything I knew about the NFL isn't really true right now. And perhaps it is the Josh Allens, the Patrick Mahomes, the Herberts, potentially the Burrows, the Lamar Jacksons, and the Kyler Murrays. As much crap as Kyler Murray has gotten about his video game addiction, he looked pretty good on Thursday night. Looks better. He looked better than Russell Wilson has looked. So I think there's just a little bit that we've taken for granted in the NFL that's not so true anymore. And it's just weird because as far as I'm concerned, Brady, Rodgers, and Wilson, they all physically can still hang. It just seems like there's a mental blockade going on with those three right now. And it just makes me wonder about the longevity of NFL quarterbacks, which is funny to talk about with Brady since he's played for 22 years. All right. Moving on quickly here before we close up. I know it's going to be a quick show, but I appreciate you all checking in, hanging out. Speaking of mental blocks, right? We just talked about how Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady seem to have reached the end, I think, of where they can mentally motivate their team. Look, now I'm never counting them out, right? I still think despite these mental blocks that have been appearing, you never want to count any of those three out. So I'm not writing them off. But I'm also not writing off the Yankees, who also seem to be in a mental block. Now, do I think they're going to come back from this 3-0 deficit? No, I don't. They're down 3-0 to the Astros, and the Astros have been there, done that, and got a World Series ring recently. Whether or not you consider it to be legitimate is a different discussion. But the Yankees find themselves in a situation where is it unlikely that they're going to win 4 games in a row against Houston? Probably unlikely. I don't think it's in the cards for them. But it is ironic because this Yankee team, we've heard 2017, get to game 7 against the Astros, lose. 2018, get eliminated by your arch rival Red Sox in the first round, the division series at home. 2019, you lose to Houston in the ALCS. 2020, I believe in the ALDS, they lost because it was the Rays, I think, that knocked them out, if I remember correctly. 2021, they lose to the Red Sox in a one-game wild card. So the Yankees have been to the playoffs and lost 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. That's 5 consecutive years of Aaron Judge, Giancarlo Stanton window. Because if you remember, 2017, they didn't have Stanton. But you remember going into the 18 season, it was, oh my word, the Yankees, they've got all these great players. You've got Aaron Judge and Giancarlo Stanton, home run leaders from each league the year before. They're going to win the next 3 World Series. They get Garrett Cole in the 2019-20 offseason. Oh my God, this team's going to dominate. They have all these young studs. They have a packed farm system. Gleyber, Torres, all these other players you've heard of. They go get Anthony Rizzo last year, guy who's been there, done that, won. They get Josh Donaldson, a former AL MVP. Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, an upstart player with huge potential. They offload some of the dead weight, like the Gary Sanchez or the Clint Frazier's or any of these other guys. And you look around and it's the same result, more or less. Now, I'm not ready to write them off completely, but it's looking pretty close. It just makes me wonder what's next for this Yankee team. Like, what's the next excuse? Because we've heard Aaron Boone talk about the ceiling being open or the roof being open or the air or the ballpark or this or that. And it just seems like there's a little bit of a curse on these Yankees right now. Now, the last time we were talking about curses in the Yankees, we were talking about the Red Sox coming back from 3-0. And so today, the Yankees were showing highlights of the 0-4 Red Sox to motivate them. Now, let's just get one thing straight about the difference between the 0-4 Red Sox and the 2022 Yankees, despite all this. The 0-4 Red Sox weren't supposed to win. The 0-4 Red Sox weren't supposed to be who they were. They had an upstart group of guys that they had sort of assembled over the years, some veterans, some guys that were good major league players, but not Hall of Fame worthy. None of them had really ever won MVPs. I think Bill Miller won a batting title. I don't think Manny or David Ortiz had won an MVP at that moment in their careers. I don't even think David Ortiz ever won an AL MVP. Johnny Damon was talented, guy known for hitting for average, but he wasn't a superstar. Curt Schilling, they had brought in a trade, but a lot of people thought he was past his prime. Pedro Martinez was in the final year of his contract. They were different. The makeup of that team was different. The entire thing was different. The amount of pressure they had after 86 years and after losing to New York the year before was entirely different. So if the Yankees are trying to draw on the 2004 Red Sox for inspiration because they were down 3-0, they can do that. But I just think it's ironic. Whereas this Yankee team, drawing from inspiration with a lineup full of all-stars, full of people that have won World Series, Josh Donaldson winning an MVP, Anthony Rizzo winning World Series, Judge definitely going to win the MVP this year. Stanton has won it. Garrett Cole's won some Cy Youngs and some rings. This entire organization is made to win right now. Whereas you look over at Houston and they've retooled and retooled and retooled. And look, I hate the Astros too. We all hate them. The baseball world hates them. They cheated and they won because they cheated. But it's kind of hard to ignore that at this moment in time, they've put together a roster where outside of Altuve and Bregman, it's kind of difficult. Maybe Verlander, if you want to make that case, but I believe he joined that team late in the year. It's kind of hard to link the 2017 Astros of 5 years ago, the cheaters of 5 years ago, to the team right now. Because Kyle Tucker wasn't around. Jordan Alvarez, nowhere to be seen. Jeremy Springer, UMaine Zone, nowhere to be found on that team. And so I'm left to look at those guys, plus people that they've brought in over the last few months, guys like Christian Vasquez, who've played a role in the postseason, and not say that this Astros team is actually more like the '04 Red Sox I'm not saying they are by themselves, but if you're relatively trying to compare and draw inspiration, it would be the team that beat the Yankees being compared to the team that's trying to beat the Yankees right now, and the team made up of a bunch of young players and veterans beating the team that's full of all-stars. Again, if you know where I'm going with this, it's just ironic. The whole comparison situation is kind of absurd and ironic to me. So the Yankees, am I writing them off? No. But what's the future? What is the future for the Yankees? If they don't end up winning the series, and again, it's highly unlikely that they will, then what are they going to do? Is Judge going to look around? And by the way, Judge has been horrendous in the postseason. Is Judge going to look around and be like, can I win in this culture? Is Brian Cashman going to look at Aaron Boone and be like, okay, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, that's 5 years of Aaron Boone with no championship. We fired Joe Girardi after bringing the Astros to Game 7 in the year in which the Astros eventually won the championship. Now, take the cheating aspect out of it. They didn't know that at the time, or at least it wasn't public at the time. They fired Joe Girardi after losing in a Game 7. So what do you do to Aaron Boone if you get swept? I don't know. If I am the New York Yankees and Aaron Boone gets fired, which I believe should happen if they get swept. If they push it to 6 games, that might save his job. But if they get swept, he's done. In my opinion, he should be. But if I'm the New York Yankees and we fired Aaron Boone, what do we do next? Because we already shook up the team in last offseason. You brought in Kiner Falefa and Donaldson. You shipped some guys out to Minnesota in that trade. Speaking of that Astros team, by the way, who lost George Springer and Correa in the offseason, doesn't look like it bothered them. But you let those guys go, perhaps, and then you bring in some guys with something to prove, Donaldson and Kiner Falefa. You don't get there, right? You've got Rizzo looking around. He came here to win. So far, hasn't happened. Garrett Cole, you owe a bunch of money to him. Like, what is their plan? I don't know what their farm system looks like. It just seems like this Yankee team will have some decisions to make. And we've been saying that every year, right? But if you really look at the way this Yankee season unfolded, they didn't play that well from about July onward. They were on a historic pace, and then they did poorly against the division. They didn't really compete in this series at all up until this moment. I mean, some of the games were close, but they blew some games against Cleveland. In my opinion, they were lucky to get by Cleveland. None of those guys are getting any younger. Judge is really, you want to build around somebody, you can build around Judge. People, they got Bader at the trade deadline. I just really don't know what their strategy is, right? Like, Aaron Judge is awesome, great, but that's not a World Series winning strategy. Baseball is a team sport. You bring back Aaron Judge, then what? Write him a blank check, then what? I don't know if the Yankees right now with Aaron Boone have the DNA. Perhaps the coach is all you need. Astros brought in Dusty Baker after they had to fire AJ Hinch. Dusty Baker has done nothing but revitalize and remotivate a team and give credibility to that team. Aaron Boone might be the least credible of the top managers in the game. Excuse me. So if I'm the Yankees and they get swept, I fire Aaron Boone and I find a way to retool that roster, which sounds crazy for a team that's as good as the Yankees were this year. But they might just want to let some of these guys go. They have the money. They can assemble a new team pretty fast. We've seen it happen before in baseball. We saw the San Francisco Giants win 110 games or something like that, 105 games after being kind of average the year before because they went out and they brought guys in. And didn't translate to the postseason for the Giants, but we know that with the Yankees, that they could probably do more than that. So I'm interested to see what the New York Yankees are able to do in the offseason. Are they going to go after a guy like Xander Bogaerts? Who knows? Are they going to go after, are they going to try and change the culture? Are they going to try and go after, I'm just speaking about the Red Sox here, Rafael Devers, if there's not an extension there? Are they going to try and change the culture? Because I think they tried that. They tried that by bringing in Donaldson and Bader and Kiner Falefa and letting Gary Sanchez leave and some of these other guys. It just didn't seem to work for them. Matt Carpenter, they even brought him in, tried to change the culture with him. It's Ruth Odor and Andrew Benintendi. Like they've tried so many things. So in many ways, they already have retooled this roster. It just seems like they need to find a new core. And the big question is, are they going to build that new core around Aaron Judge? Time will tell. All right, that's going to do it for this episode of Home Field Advantage. I hope you enjoyed the program. Again, if you're checking us out on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button down below. It helps a lot to grow the channel. I can't believe I haven't talked to you in over 10 days since last Thursday when we did the NHL preview with Diesel. We've had a lot happen in the sports world since then, the Tennessee beating Alabama and all these MLB playoff situations and all the other stuff. But rest assured, we'll be back next week with a new pod. As I just said, please toss us a subscribe below if you're listening or if watching on YouTube. If you're listening on Spotify, please do the same thing. Same thing with Apple and anywhere else you get podcasts. Share it with your friends, subscribe, all that good stuff. We'll be back next week with another episode of Home Field Advantage. But until next time, my name is Will Island. You've been listening to the October 23rd edition of Home Field Advantage.